The area of a rectangle is a way of describing how much space there is inside the rectangle. If we have a rectangle with a width of 1 inch and a length of 2 inches, how much space is there inside this rectangle? If I cut my rectangle up so that the 2 inches is 1 inch and 1 inch, then I have a 1 inch by 1 inch square. How much space is there inside this square that's 1 inch by 1 inch? What I have in this square is 1 inch square, or 1 square inch. Here I have another 1 square inch. So the area inside this rectangle is the sum of these, which is 2 square inches. You'll be pleased to know there's a way to write this in an abbreviated form. For now, we're going to use SQ for square, IN for inches, 2 square inches. Here's a rectangle that's 3 feet on one side and 4 feet on the other. In other words, the length of this rectangle is 4 feet and its width is 3 feet. Since this rectangle is 4 feet long, let's cut it in half, and let's cut each of those halves in half as well. So now I can see 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, for a total of 4 feet in length. I'm going to do the same thing with the width by cutting the width into 3. That means that each of these squares is 1 foot by 1 foot. So for each one of these smaller squares, 1 foot by 1 foot, what's inside that is 1 square foot. I'm going to find the same in each of the squares that I've cut my big rectangle into. When I'm talking about area, what I mean is how many of these squares do I have? In this case, I have 12. The short way to determine how many squares you have is to take a look at how many rows and how many columns. I have 3 rows of squares, and in each row I have 4 squares. So I have a total of 3 times 4 squares, or 3 times 4 square feet. I have 12 square feet. So what if you didn't know the actual size of your rectangle? In other words, what if it was L feet by W feet? Well, I can't actually cut the L up into L individual feet because I don't know what L is and I don't know what W is. So I can't cut it into W rows. But using the previous example as a model, I can say that I would have W rows, and in each one of those rows I would have L squares. So the formula for the area of a rectangle is the number of rows times the number of columns, or the length times the width. If the rectangle you're working with is a square, then the length and the width are going to be the same measurement. Instead of L feet by W feet, since this is a square, it's L by L. In keeping with the practice in your textbook, let's rename those S and S, just like we did with perimeter. If this is S feet by S feet, then presumably I could cut this square up into S even columns. The problem is, I don't know what S is. But if I could, I would have S rows, and in each row, I would have S squares. So for a square, the formula for the area is S times S. We have a shorthand for anything multiplied by itself. For S times itself, I'm going to write S to the power of 2, or S squared. The use of the word squared to mean to the power of 2 is not an accident. We've squared the length of S. Here's a triangle. This triangle is actually made up of two smaller triangles. Can you imagine with me for a moment that this triangle was actually part of a larger rectangle? The larger triangle is part of a rectangle there. The smaller triangle is part of a rectangle here. For each one of these rectangles, the area inside the entire rectangle is the length of the rectangle times the width. But that's this whole rectangle. The triangle is only half of that. Length times width divided by 2. Now let's take a look at the other half. The length and width of this rectangle tell us that the area of the entire rectangle is length times width. But I'm not interested in the area of the rectangle, just this half of it that makes up the triangle. The length times the width of the rectangle cut in half to give me the area of just the triangle. The length times the width cut in half of one side of my rectangle plus the length times the width of the other half gives me the total area of the triangle, this half of this rectangle, plus this half of this rectangle, or the total area of the triangle. So the area of a triangle is found by taking the length of the rectangle it's a part of and multiplying it by the width of the rectangle that it's a part of and cutting that in half. There are a couple of different ways you might see this formula written. In particular, your textbook uses area equals 1/2 length times width. That's really the same thing as what I've written up here. It's the length times the width, cut that in half, or the length times the width, now take half of that. Whichever way you write this formula, it means the same thing. Let's tidy things up a little bit and summarize. The area of a rectangle is its length times its width. The area of a square is its side times its side, or its side squared. The area of a triangle is half of its length times its width. When we're working with a triangle, instead of calling this measurement the length, We call it the base. So let's replace L with B. Instead of calling this measurement the width, we call it the height of the triangle. So let's replace our W with an H. The formula for the area of a triangle is 1/2 times the base times the height. You might also see this formula written as base times height over 2.